Hey guys, so we're going to continue with our regression series, and this time, instead of looking at one particular fund, we're going to look at value funds versus growth funds. And the question we want to ask are, what type of securities are growth funds purchasing today, in what sectors, and what essentially is a value fund today as well? Like what are you truly betting on when you buy a growth fund, for example, a Vanguard growth fund? What are you really betting on? What sectors are you really betting on? And same with value. If you're holding a value fund right now, what sectors are you have bias towards? So let's get started. All right, so in this video, again, we're going to be using Pandas data reader, import data. We're going to use Pandas, import Pandas, and NumPy for calculations. We are going to use the data reader to pull in several securities. So we are going to look at the Vanguard VUG, that is the growth fund. VTV is the Vanguard Value Fund. These are both large cap funds. We're also going to look at VBK, which is the small cap growth, and VBR, the small cap value. And we're going to regress that. And the sectors we're going to look at are all these different sectors: VOX, VCR, VDC. These are all Vanguard sectors. For example, VHT is health, VFH is financials, VIS is industrials. I actually should pull this up to make this easier for you, so let me do that right now. Okay guys, so you can see here we have our different sector and specialty ETFs. We have the communications services sector, VOX, VCR is consumer discretionary, VDC is consumer staples, VDE energy, VFH financials, VHT health, VIS industrials, VGT information technologies, VAW materials, VNQ real estate, and VPU utilities. And the reason why I'm using the Vanguard funds, and I mentioned this in my last video, is that they encompass the entire spectrum of large, medium, and small caps for each of these sectors. Okay, so let's get back to our regression. So these are the Vanguard sector funds we're using, and we want to look, again, so our question we want to hypothesize is what specifically is in a growth fund today. I'm going to hypothesize that it's most likely a technology sector type of securities. For value, I don't really know. We'll find that out today. I have an inclination of what it is, but we'll see. I'm thinking it's financials and industrial, so we'll take a look. All right, so let's pull in that data. I'm going to pull that data in, and we can look at, again, we're going to look at the adjusted close. So we can take a look at what we're looking at here. So you can see the prices. You can see different prices across this time frame. And actually, you know what? Let's look at within the last year of 2020. I think that would be a little more interesting here. So let's just look at, we'll re-pull this data from 2020, January, 2021, January 1st. So we'll pull that, because keep in mind, what regression is doing is it's looking at the variability of the returns in one fund and regressing it on the variability of the returns of several other funds. And depending on the time period that we choose, there's going to be variation there's going to be different movements of variation depending on themes that happen during that year or not. So sometimes you'll have different regime changes in different periods of time. For example, in the 90s versus maybe the early 80s or the late 60s. These are different time periods where different things happen, different themes happen, different types of psychological factors, risk factors that people determine in different sectors. So keep that in mind when using this approach to regress, using regression. All right, so I want percentage changes on these instead of prices, so we can look at the percentage changes. So these are daily returns. Again, I'm going to do the log, natural log, find the natural log of them. And I talked about it, natural log returns in another video, the importance of them. So we have the log returns, and now let's plot that. It's not going to be that helpful because it's going to show a lot of different data, so can't really see a lot of variability here back in the beginning of the year. Remember, that's right when COVID began, so we should expect that. Let's look at a covariance matrix, but remember, covariance is hard to interpret, so we have a correlation matrix, so we can look at relationships. So let's, for example, VFH, that's something I know pretty easy, is healthcare, is financials. How does that relate to healthcare, which is VHT, has a correlation of 0.79. Okay, so fairly strong. It looks like industrials and health and financials have a much stronger correlation of 0.95. So you can get some idea of the correlations of these different sectors over the past year in 2020. All right, now let's import our stats models to do a regression. So stats models.api. Patsy is going to help us utilize a better way of formatting this data. Essentially, it's similar to using the same formatting as R, the programming language R. So right here, this is very similar to an R programming language here. But anyway, so what we're going to do here, so let's take a look at VBR first. So VBR is a small cap value. And actually, you know what? Let's just look at VBK first. That's growth. So again, we're hypothesizing growth. What is growth? It's most likely tech. So we're going to see that if there's a strong T stat for the tech sector, which is VGT, we should expect that. We should expect a very large T stat there. So we'll see, and a very small p-value. All right, cool. So let's put that in. Remember, we're using log returns, and this is a data frame. All right, we're going to use ordinary least squares. So we're going to take sn.ols, put in our dependent variables y and our independent variables x. Again, if you want to look at what these look like, you can see these are their dependent variables, and v, which is VBK, which is the small cap growth fund, and our independent variables, all our different sector funds, Vanguard sector funds. All right, so let's build that model, let's fit it, and let's look at the results. All right, so fairly strong R squared, so about 94% of the variability of the returns can be described from these sectors, so that's great. Statistically significant, a very large F statistic. In some of my other videos, I talk more about these stats in regression, but now let's take a look at the T-stats. So remember, we want to look for a very large T-stats. If you're pretty familiar with regression, you already know like a T-stat of 7 is very large, so that's very significant. So VCR has a very large T-stat. Look at this negative relationship with VDC. VDC again is what? Consumer staples. That's interesting. So there's a negative relationship in the small cap growth fund to consumer staples. Okay. Now let's test that hypothesis. VGT. Remember, VGT is our information technology sector. Look how large that T-stat is, 3.9. So there does seem to be a bias towards the technology sector. But notice how there's some other larger T-stats. Notice how VCR has a much larger T-stat actually than VGT. But regardless, you can't really compare which a larger T-stat versus a smaller one. Really, what's this saying is that they're statistically significant. Really, we should look at the coefficient. So you can see the coefficient here is 0.38. It's very large for VCR. And again, VCR is VCR, consumer discretionary. So there seems to be a bias towards consumer discretionary stocks in the small cap growth. All right, so that kind of confirms our hypothesis with technology. So let's take a look at the small cap value. So small cap value is VBR. So I'm going to just change the model here, and we're going to put in VBR. So now we have VBR. Our independent variables are still the same, but our dependent variable has changed. Let's fit this model on VBR now. VBR, remember, small cap value. So take a look at that. Strong R squared, large R squared, large F statistic. Let's look at the T-stats. All right, to 6.5 VCR. So again, another bias towards consumer. VCR is consumer discretionary. I gotta remember that. And let's look at VFH, very large T-stat here for financials. Okay, that's interesting. A negative relationship to technology, and another very large T-stat for industrial. So again, so what are we really, it seems like what we're really, when you're buying this fund, what you're really betting on financials, financial companies, and industrials. So that's essentially what you're doing. Okay, so let's look at the large cap now. So large cap growth is VUG, and large cap value is VTV. So let's take a look at growth. I'm going to assume it's going to be tech again. So that is VUG. Let's look at that. VUG, regressing on the same variables. And VGT, look at that. Very large. Tech, growth, not surprising there. I'm more interested in value, so let's take a look at value. So VTV, what's VTV going at? Oh, actually I already pulled that. We don't need to, oops. We don't need to touch that. Let's go down here. We need to put in VTV. Okay. VTV. What's the largest T-stat here? There we go. Financials and VDC staples. So that's interesting. It does have industrials, but look at how strong this relationship for staples. The coefficients are very large actually if you're staples. It seems to be lots larger for consumer staples in the large cap value versus the small cap value. So that's interesting. And yeah, but there's definitely a bias towards industrials. They're biased towards financials. Not a very strong bias, a negative relationship, but this is statistically significant, so not a very strong relationship to consumer discretionary. Okay, so you can see kind of the idea of how we can use this to determine what sectors we truly are betting on when we're, buying a large cap value or a large cap growth fund or a small cap growth or small cap value fund. So that's the power of regression. So if you like this video, please subscribe. Thanks, guys. In the next video, we'll talk more about regression and utilizing it for other ideas. All right. Thanks, guys.